Hey guys, welcome back. So if you have not already watched the first part in this little mini video series, I recommend watching that first because this is not going to make a whole lot of sense unless you've watched that one first. So we'll just go through each of these tools one at a time, and then as we've talked between the Bugout equivalent mini version of it and compared it to the full-size version, we'll take it off the table to slowly go from this huge mess that we've made to put back together how it's supposed to be. So I'll start with really basic, just Allen keys. For these Allen keys, it's pretty obvious what they're used for. 12 of them in each package, one standard, one metric. The actual full-size equivalent are the hex T-handles. This obviously would not fit in the bag. Even if I took them all apart, they'd take up way too much space with each of the individual T-handles. They're easier to use. You get more leverage. It also has these combination tools with the fold-out attachments. You could argue that this is a fair comparison and these don't take up that much space, but you need both. You need a standard, you need a metric. So these do, as is, take up more space than just a little sleeve of 12 Allen keys. Next is the combination wrenches. We talked about this already a little bit. They are small, a lot of sizes that you might not necessarily use and maybe wish you had bigger versions of it. So the full size equivalent, one standard, one metric, takes up a lot more space, it's a lot heavier. But like we said already in the first video, you don't have to always use a full size set of combination wrenches. If what you're working on will accept sockets as opposed to open-ended combination wrenches. So something like this, as is, does take up a lot more space than two sleeves of combination wrenches, but it does have a little bit of dual purpose. So in addition to the 9 sockets attachments, you can also attach any of the screwdriver bits that either you have in a separate kit or the ones that are in here. Attach these screw bits into here, and now you have a ratcheting screwdriver. You can also pick and choose individual sockets out of something like this, and you don't have to bring the entire case. If you don't want the extension, you only want the ratcheting palm driver and a couple of the sockets, then that could take up less space and be lighter than a bunch of combination wrenches that you're not even ever actually going to use. Next is the hammer. This one's pretty easy comparison. You can just see size difference between a normal hammer and this little stubby hammer. This is 8 ounces, the head is 8 ounces, which is kind of light, but for the size, like I said in the first video, a couple more swings with this than you would get with this. And then you're a little bit closer to maybe hitting your hand if you don't have great aim. With a full-size hammer, it's a lot harder to hurt yourself because of how much further down the handle your hand is. This is a small fixed blade knife like the Mora. This could go on a belt loop, on your pocket, on your backpack. This doesn't have to go in the toolkit, but you also don't necessarily need it if you already have one. It doesn't have to be a full-size fixed blade knife like this one, but the full tang capability and the hardened steel on the back end could take the place of a hammer. If you had absolutely no space to bring an actual hammer, this hard metal end could work in a pinch. For the little crowbar, if you don't have the little stubby mini hammer, or it's not long enough, you can't get enough leverage, then this could come in handy. It's nowhere near the amount of space, or nowhere near the amount of weight as a full size, nowhere near the amount of leverage that a full size crowbar will provide you, but a lot smaller, a lot lighter. Silcock key, I have never seen a mini version of this, so I have nothing to compare it to. But it doesn't take up that much space. It's fairly low profile. It's not that heavy. Obviously just fits in the palm of your hand, so you can put it in any pocket in the toolkit or even in your Bugout bag somewhere. For the locking pliers, obviously different uses for the locking pliers. They work the exact same as a full size normal set. Where you pull the little tab and it releases. You can adjust how open or closed the teeth are by adjusting this thumb screw, and then from that point getting it to where you want to grab, and then it'll lock from that point. Same thing on here, just pull the little tab and then it's adjustable from there with the little thumb screw on the back. You can see the tooth design and the profile is a little bit different on both of these. I figured they were different enough and small enough that you could include both. This style, a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, same thing. Just releases that way. And this is the adjustable thumb screw on the back. Crescent wrench, a lot smaller than a full normal size set of channel locks, but might be long enough handles that you can get enough torque. Might open enough that it opens to a big enough position where you don't actually need the full size set. Technically they do open pretty wide, maybe you could say wider than a set of the plier teeth on a multi-tool, but I don't think it's actually going to grab anything when it's open that far. And realistically, maybe from that point to all the way closed, but nowhere near what you can get on a full-size normal set of channel locks. So that's one trade-off for sure. If you're expecting to need to grab onto larger objects than what this can handle, then maybe just opt for the full-size set. We've obviously talked about the screwdriver tips and bits a lot already, but just to give you a comparison on the size, so something like this would be equivalent to a set like this, roughly the same amount of bits. You're obviously getting the drill tips on this end. Every single one of these is a little bit different than the other. For example, this DeWalt one is only drill bits. This Home Depot brand is only drill bits. This right angle bit driver is about half drill bit or screwdriver tips and sockets. It's about the same number of screw bits, but this takes up a lot more space than this does. This might be the best comparison if you're just talking just screwdriver tips. Got 33 screwdriver tips in here, and then the carrying case, and then this has just 30. So this is definitely smaller, definitely lighter, but it's an at least equal comparison. For the drill, talked about this already, but another size comparison. This one bit with 13 different sizes is equivalent to about this top half of this kit. This kit has 10 along the top and then a lot of duplicate sizes down underneath. This kit from DeWalt has one more bit, so you get a tiny bit more to choose from than this stepped bit, but this takes up so much more space. This takes up so much more space than this one does. And like I said before, unless you have the version of drill bit that has a 1/4 inch socket attachment, there's no way for you to actually use the tool unless you're bringing something with a adjustable chuck on it to grab onto those. You could opt for this style of drill as opposed to the spiral cylindrical style, but I can only imagine how difficult it would be to cut with these as opposed to the more optimized and efficient cylindrical bits like that. The box opener straight blade knife doesn't take up that much less space than a normal size box cutter, but like I said, it's worth the little bit of extra weight. Similar weight, but slightly heavier on the folding box cutter. I think it's definitely worth the convenience of how easy it is to change the blades and how hard it is to lose the blades if they're all stored in the handle. So, box cutter knife, maybe the mini version, maybe not, it's a little bit gimmicky. Multi-tool knives up to you. You can see that it's a little bit redundant. I don't need a 1/4 inch bit driver if I have one already in this. Even this screwdriver, you take out the bit, that's a 1/4 inch bit driver. I've already covered knives multiple times in the knives we just talked about, as well as in your multi-tool you have knives. If you've got backup breakable blades, box cutter knives, if you have a fixed blade knife like we talked about with that Moore knife, that's a knife. If you have a more full-sized survival fixed blade knife in your Bugout bag, then you can see a lot of this is a little bit unnecessary and redundant. So you can maybe save some space and weight by skipping that. Depending if you think you're going to be working with electrical components, wire stripper like this, not very much smaller than a full size, just a tiny bit smaller. If you compare the bottom, you can tell the full size is just a tiny bit longer, a little bit heavier, equally about the same as far as like use. The Klein tool full size blade has some more adjustability with like crimping, whereas this one does not. It just has the wire stripper components and then the wire cutter up there at the top. Also the Klein tool gives you a little bit more opportunity to cut certain size threads down there in the center. This does not. It's only got two 8/32 and 10/32. So that might be a tool where it's worth getting the full size set. Another tool that's an example of multi-use being a little bit redundant is this set of locking vice grip pliers. You can tell that this end of the tool is a normal set of locking pliers like we talked about a couple times in the videos, but also this back end has a knife, and like we just talked about, we've got plenty of knives in the kit. Don't necessarily need a bunch more screwdrivers like this one has down here in the bottom, because we already have multiple screwdrivers. So it is nice to save some space and some weight if you can have one tool accomplish multiple tasks, but if it's just accomplishing the same task over and over and over again, then it's kind of useless. If you were to only get a couple pairs of these breaking adjustable box cutter knives, these do take up less space, and they are maybe, you could argue they're maybe a little easier to use than a normal full-size box cutter knife, because you just break off the tip of the blade once it gets dull instead of opening the tool and replacing the blade. They don't take up very much space and they're really light, so I like them. The wire cutters, if you already have your wire strippers that have the wire cutter down here in the back, this is a little bit redundant, but this is definitely smaller than a normal full-size set of wire cutters. You can tell it's like half the length of this set. They do make smaller versions of tire gauges. I don't think it's worth the extra space that you save, because it'd be nice to know that this is actually accurate. So I think it's worth getting the full-size tool with that. These expandable magnets, obviously all of the space you're saving is how much it collapses into its normal pen-sized stowed setting. But then the capacity that you're getting by being able to reach down into like an engine compartment to pick up anything that's metallic might make it worth the extra weight that you're carrying around in the little pen size form factor. Mechanics wire, nothing really to compare that to. Does not take up very much space and is not very heavy. Super glue, you could get bigger or smaller tubes of this. It's obviously fairly small, but depending on how much you think you need, you might want to opt for a bigger bottle of super glue. The mini roll of duct tape, you could make this as big or small as you want. Obviously takes a lot less space than this does. It's a lot less duct tape than this is, but it's also way smaller. A lot lighter because it's not as much tape. Like I said, up to you on how much you roll into your handmade duct tape roll. Tape measure if you think you need it, compared to a normal 25 or larger foot version of a tape measure. It's about half the size, half the weight. Not as easy to use, but takes up a lot less space than this does. We've talked really in depth about the screwdrivers already, but in order to do the fair comparison on the mini size combination tool compared to a normal size tool, obviously this It's a lot smaller than an entire set of screwdrivers. This is completely unrealistic to bring this entire thing with you with the storage tray, but you can see how having this many differently sized screwdrivers could get annoying to have to dig through if they're all just loose in some sort of tool bag. But technically, obviously, one combination screwdriver with your adjustable combination bits takes up the size of just one of the 20 screwdrivers on here. For this woodcutter, it's fairly compact, not tiny, not nearly as small as like the wood saw bit on the end of the multi-tool blade. This little hatchet is not small either. This wood saw blade is fairly compact. It's due to the fact that it's folded in half. It's not small by any means. You could make an argument that any smaller and it's not really going to be that useful because you're not going to get enough surface area and not enough teeth. This also is not very small. It's not very light. Compared to a normal full-size axe, it's small. But if you're comparing like wood processing on a wood saw blade like this, it's nowhere near as small as the saw blade on a set of multi-tool like that, but not as useful. However, even though these are large compared to the one blade on a multi-tool, it's a lot smaller, a lot easier to pack than a blade like this. You're not going to get as nice of a cut as you would on something with small teeth like that. And it's not going to be very fast or effortless, but compared to a full-size chainsaw, it's obviously a lot easier to pack something like that in your bug-out bag than trying to pack an entire chainsaw in there. The rope, depending on how much rope you have, will determine how much space it takes up. Not much to compare that to either. But a notebook, a fairly small notebook, you can get a bigger notebook if you want. I don't know if you'll be writing enough to need much more than what's on here. So that's pretty self-explanatory as well. The sewing kit, it's fairly small. I've seen smaller sewing kits. I've also seen much bigger. So depending on what sort of wear and tear you're going to put on your clothes will determine how much larger or smaller a sewing kit to maybe look for. I don't have a full-size hacksaw, but just quickly talking over, if the smallest you can go on a hacksaw is the blade itself, then obviously besides just cutting down the blade, you're not going to be able to get much more capability of cutting metal with a hacksaw blade than a handle that takes up less space than the blade itself. For the multi-tool, they're all fairly equal in size, unless you purposely go for a smaller multi-tool. This Leatherman Free is basically the exact same size, length and width. This little Gerber one, it's a little bit smaller, but not noticeably smaller, especially because it's wider than the typical multi-tool is, because these handles flare out. The length's about the same. Like I said, if you go specifically for a smaller multi-tool on purpose, it's going to be a little bit harder to use, but it will weigh less and it will take up less space. The drill doesn't really have an equal comparison besides just the capabilities you have from your multi-use screwdriver. Drill bits we've already talked about a bunch, so I'll put this to the side. Hose clamps and zip ties, depending on how much you think you're going to need. You can either pack more or less. You can pack different sizes if you want. You can pack different colors of zip ties, depending on what you might be using them for. Depending on how heavy duty the use case you think is going to be, you can get heavy duty zip ties. If your screwdriver has enough tips, you don't need the little precision small electronics screwdriver or sunglasses, eyeglasses screwdriver kit like this. Talked about thread locker. There's not much smaller bottle of thread locker you can buy than this one. The 3 parts in the 3-in-1 penetrating oil. So first it frees rusted parts, which is what PB Blaster penetrating catalyst would do. Then prevents rust, which is what water displacing WD-40 would do, and then lubricates, which is what an all-purpose lubricant would do. This doesn't do anything as well as each of those that are specifically designed to do the penetrating of rust, preventing rust, or lubricating parts, but it takes a lot less space than any of these do. You can buy a bigger bottle of it, but the smaller bottle obviously takes less space, a little bit lighter, and it doesn't leak because it's got a adjustable nozzle that threads on and off, as opposed to this cap that just kind of pops on and off on the normal 3-in-1 multi-purpose oil bottle. For pencil and the wax pencil, you could cut these down and make them shorter if you want, but then they're not going to work as well. They're not going to last as long. They're not going to be as easy to write with. The pen, you can't do much with a tactical pen to make it any smaller than it is, unless you just get a normal size pen. For your fire starting stuff, whether that's matches or Bic lighter, that's kind of just, you're stuck with the size that comes in. Chem lights do come in a smaller size version, but it's not going to be as bright, not going to last as long. So normal sized chem light, if you think it's useful. The earplugs don't take up very much space at all. There's not a smaller version of earplugs than the in-ear style. If you get over the ear style, it's going to take a lot more space than this will. So here, I'll pause the video real quick and then take a second to pack everything up and give you like a visual representation of how much less space this toolkit takes up once it's packed up compared to all the other normal full-size tools tried to packed into a slightly larger tool bag. So got everything packed up, left all the pockets open so you could see that everything is back in there. And here we've got 3-in-1 lubricating oils, the zip ties, the pen and pencils, the magnet, these cloths, mechanics wire, the thread locker, the drill bit, super glue, all the tools that are on the outside, the fire starting stuff, the notepad, the rope, all the pliers and screwdrivers and everything that's down in the main compartment, the fuel treatment, that goofy little multi-purpose knife. The hacksaw blade and handle doesn't fit, it's too long. Also, if you didn't pack these already, that's the additional space that would be taken up by either your hatchet or your wood processing wood saw. But it takes a lot less space than all of this. You can see that trying to fit everything into this tool bag, I could not get everything to fit. Even if I had crammed it down further, it's just, a lot of it's too tall. The saw, these drill bits, all these pliers and full-size hammer, all these aerosol-based chemicals. Don't want any of these getting punctured with the thin metal sides. All this stuff, obviously the chainsaw takes a ton of space. The little earplugs in here take up so much less space than an over-ear set of hearing protection. And then that's not even like with the replacement battery or the charger for the chainsaw. So this is harder to use, it's more work, it takes a lot less space than the chainsaw does, and it's a lot quieter too. If you guys have any questions or any tips, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.